Dr. Maria Papageorgiou, thank you very much for joining our interview series. Thank you very much. Let me start right away with the first question. Your work often situates social media within broader transformations of international relations. How would you characterize the structural shift introduced by social media platforms compared to earlier communication technologies like printing press, radio, particularly regarding their impact on democratic deliberation?
Okay, thank you for the invitation. So to address your question, I think we need to consider social media a more profound structural shift in communication than previous other advancements and technologies. It differs in many significant ways. So for instance, earlier technologies, they transform how information was produced and was disseminated. But social media fundamentally alter other elements. So it was who was communicated this information with a wide range of actors. It could be media as well. It could be just normal people. It could be politicians. So it really transform of who can disseminate this information. And the other very important element is how fast information circulates. So it can have a real-time response, it can travel very fast in no time, and it could reach wider audience, not only in one country, but in many different countries. So we have wider reach, we have different languages. It was more easily accessible for the wider population, very low requirements. You just needed, for example, a mobile, that it had access to the internet, and you can just very easily participate. So it really transformed how communication, it really drastically changed this element. Now when it comes to how we address democratic deliberation, so social media create both advances, expanded, we can say, this perspective of democratic deliberation, but also created some challenges on how these specific debates presented and occur themselves. So on the one hand, it has broadened participation when it comes to public discourse. Normal citizens, they could voice their opinions, they could share information, they could engage directly with political actors, for instance. They could reply to their comments, they could more easily criticize their policies or the statements. So that had a significant impact, and we can say that it increased and has mobilized political participation. On the other hand, we can see that with all of this information provided, there were certain elements that they were used. So, for example, the online content has many false information or many exaggerated information. It has led more to using sentiment when you are expressing a political opinion. And ultimately, this led to a polarization. So we see many different changes when it comes to camps. So we have many different ideological camps. And that has created a bit of a chasm that we didn't have before. We can say a schism, that it leads to opposing audiences. And we are missing this common line in deliberation. There is a fragmented quality, we can say, of deliberation. So even though it had the benefit of increasing political participation, especially in younger ages, we can see that the debate now is skewed by the great amount of information that it is out there, that this information might not be exactly accurate. It can be framed in a way to lead towards a narrative, and it has created this idea that we have to select one side or the other. So we don't really criticize policies or, for example, measures or ideas, or we don't congratulate opponents, for example, for something successful, but we stick on our camp and we keep promoting that particular narrative of the group. So I think this is a significant drawback when we're talking about democratic deliberation. But we shouldn't only, I think, look at the democracies and the impact that social media have. If we look at the more authoritarian states, for instance, social media created a very new space, particularly when they were first introduced, to increase civic engagement, to increase mobilization, to increase even dissent to certain policies. And it allowed the citizens to coordinate, for example, certain practices, to mobilize together. And we see the impact that this had, for example, during the Arab Spring or the protests in Iran. So it had really significant impact in both democratic societies, but also more heavily controlled and authoritarian regimes.
Right. Drawing on role theory and your Twitter-based analysis, how do digital platforms reshape state identity and foreign policy roles in real time, especially during crises like COVID-19 or the Ukraine war?
I think this is one of the biggest benefit of the social media, that they can present policies in real time. You can present shorter responses. You don't need to have this very long diplomatic language. You can use simple word in 800 characters and very easily access the information. So it's very easy to give information, to give guidelines. And that was particularly useful in terms of crisis on the one hand, but also it created many other issues. I will unpack this now. So, for example, if we want to look particularly at role theory, it's like it focuses on how states present themselves to the others. And I think this is very important because we can see how many different states they really engage when it comes to digital diplomacy. They have created multiple official accounts on Twitter. They are very active. They are posting continuously. Either they are ambassadors, either through ministries of foreign affairs. So there is an active presence. And through the messaging and the particular phrasing that they are using, they are positioning themselves. So they want to create a particular role for what their country is doing, and particularly in times of crisis. So, for instance, we can see that during COVID, many actors they try to present themselves as responsible global powers, or that they were humanitarians, that they shared data, that they did solidarity messages, sending equipment, even disseminating vaccines. So they frame themselves as a particular responsible power. We can see particularly China, Russia, and many other countries using this particular framing to present themselves as such. So they use many communicative acts. They were having videos of airplanes transporting assistance and medical equipment to other countries. They use, for example, hashtags Russia helps, for instance. That they were becoming viral, so they were increasing the engagement, they were increasing the retweets and likes, so they were presenting a particular image to the international community. For example, during the Ukraine war, Ukraine used and made, we can say, took advantage of the benefits of social media to present itself as a country that it is defending its democracy. It tried to engage with other citizens around the world. It tried to raise support for the Ukrainian cause. It tried to show what it is happening on the ground and all these injustices, etc. And we can see, on the other hand, that Russia, from its part, through the social media, it tried to justify its action. It used, for example, historical narratives that, in terms of the land acquisition in the Ukraine, that they were part of the Russian Empire, or that, for example, Crimea was given to Ukraine during the Soviet Union, and that they were forced to respond into this way because of NATO, for example, expansion. So they try to present themselves as a country that it was forced to do this because it was defending itself against, for example, this NATO expansion, all of these historical grievances of the population in Donbass, etc. So we can see that, particularly during times of crisis, when the information it's like in real time, like states makes even more prevailing their presence in social media, because during this time they can more easily frame and project their national identity. And this is very important because particularly when countries like Russia or China, they're using social media that they're not widely used in other countries. So, for example, Twitter is banned in China and is not very widely used in Russia compared to Telegram, for instance. So it means that they are targeting international audiences. And that's why, from this role theory perspective, we can see how they project themselves, how they project the identity to others, because they want to be received in a particular way.
Right. To what extent were 2016, 2020, and 2024 US elections shaped by the strategic use of social media by political actors versus structural platform dynamics like algorithms and network effects?
I think the social media effect when it comes to political campaigning and communication and how to engage the population started earlier, started with the Obama campaign in 2008, that he utilized Facebook originally to attract younger volunteers and then to targeting voters. So it has started since then. But I think 2016 is a crucial year because Donald Trump presence into politics, and even before, when he was competing for the Republican charisma, we can see that he really altered how we use social media for political purposes and how they design political communication. So, especially him for the 2016 election, he used almost exclusively Twitter. So he posted short direct messages. He retweeted his followers. So we can see in his account that many times he retweeted his followers' messages. He responded to them. And that was received very positively by the public. And even accounts who were very neutral, they found it this very, very, how to say, very new. So that was evident as well, but the followers he amassed. So if we compare him during the same period with Hillary Clinton, he had a double digit difference when it comes to the difference into the followers. So he used extensively this particular tone, this new form of communication, that it was direct to the audience, direct to its voters, and direct to its base. He didn't use this traditional media means. He didn't use this rigid form of reading statements, for example. And if we also see, if we compare, for example, during that period, we can see that very different style that the Clinton campaign was using, for instance. And even though they tried to change because they saw the impact that, for example, Trump's campaign had in gaining followers and retweets, it was very significant, for instance, because Trump was using more, we can say, caustic responses. He was using a bit of sarcasm and all of this element that allow this even to create sketches and responses and cartoons, that it led to a more massive campaign, and so more viral. So, for instance, there are some elements that for certain posts, for example, on Twitter, Trump's, for example, it had 6,000 more times been retweeted compared to Clinton that stand around 1,000, 1,500. So we can see it's significant, the difference. Then moving to 2020, I think it was when these social media campaigns, they become more professionalized. They use these digital operations, they use analytics, they employed more influencers, they use a bit more systematic strategies, specific messaging. What are they going to use? They use a lot of more videos, So it was more professionalized. And in 2024, we see even more advancements, because in the 2024 election, both of the candidates, they really use systematically social media, not only to communicate with the voters, but they conducted interviews only in social media, for example. They raised funds through social media. They made evident communication about volunteers. So it was not only about reaching and communicating with the audience, but now it was a wider range of operation. And also, if we say that before, in 2016 and 2020, Twitter, we can say it was the predominant social media use. In 2024, we have the presence of TikTok as well, that it was widely used along Twitter. We have podcasts, that it was very important for these campaigns, YouTube channels. uh, Both of the political leaders of these two parties, they conducted interviews with influencers. They invited influencers to record the campaigns, to be in the press, and to be in official spaces. So it really changed the way that campaigns, especially in the United States, but it has also ripple effects in other countries, are designed for communicating with the public. And I think it's very important, because they have managed with the social media to find more cost effective solutions. So they didn't need to spend so much on these kind of things. They could reach the same audience without having the budget constraints, for example, of traditional advertising. And it has been quite successful for both of them. And even a new tool that was introduced during the 2024 campaigns, and both of the two candidates used, was the generative AI. We can see that Trump was posting certain memes and cartoons of Kamala Harris. The Harris campaign also used AI to fill in the crowd in certain of the photos. So they took advantage of this in a different way. The campaigns use AI in different ways, but we can see that this was a new element integrated during this election. So overall, since 2008, we can see more and more involvement of social media, reaching to 2024, where more emphasis was placed in social media campaigns, in social media communication campaigns, than traditional media.
Right. Do you view Trump's digital communication strategies as a case of personalized populist leadership leveraging structural media affordances, or as indicative of broader transformations in US political communication?
I think Trump's style, we can say that changed completely the communication in social media and digital diplomacy. We can see that he managed to bypass traditional media to speak directly to its supporters. He used a particular language, a particular tone, for example, that it was some sort of an urgent sense of crisis or a confrontation with his opponents, that it became very specific. Even when he became president, the way he was addressing his opponents or his allies, it created a very new phenomenon. And even other countries, they try to adopt similar, we can say, Twitter diplomacy. So he really transformed the way that diplomatic communication. It replaced many previous norms, for example. So he used, we can say, and what did he bridge? It's very important that he bridged domestic issues with international signaling. Also, his messages were more performative. They have this more personalized element, that they were centered around him and what is he doing. And he had a particular digital posture when it comes, for example, to his critic, to his opponents. For example, there are many very famous tweets um, for the North Korean leader, for example, or for other leaders that he has directly threatened, criticized. So we can say that Trump presence has changed completely the communication practices. It was a turning point, and it actually, I think, demonstrates how the digital platforms allow for this more populist performance, especially when you have this executive authority, and how they can really transform previous norms that we were more used to in terms of political and diplomatic interaction. And we can see this, that now we cannot go to these previous, to these older forms of communication. The public is not receptive to this. They are more accustomed to these new political practices, and I'm afraid this is going to continue in the future. So he really transformed. We cannot say that it was just a populist a leader or a populist actor. We can say that the way that he approached social media, it has significant impact when it comes to decreasing support and trust in traditional media, because he has severely criticized traditional media. It has allowed the population to see for themselves and be able to have access to information that before they might not have from traditional media, because they were promoting just one narrative or one political party, for instance. And even diplomacy and the way international relations or foreign policy is conducted, for example, mentioning a particular leader, for example, directly addressing a particular leader, making a specific communication when it comes to what policy they are going to use on one issue, and just reflecting the country's policy. For instance, it has really changed the norms of political and diplomatic interaction.
Right. How has the fragmentation of the US information ecosystem affected democratic resilience, especially when different partisan groups operate with divergent factual baselines?
I think this is very important, and I think this is what social media not only exemplified, it has created this highly polarized group where they both of them they have very divergent factual baselines. So, for example, we knew, for example, that from the past, certain media, particularly when it comes to the US, but also from other countries, they were leaning towards a particular political party, and they were trying to reinforce particular policies, etc. But now with the social media, we can see this extreme polarization when it comes to supporting one political party over the other, or one political leader. So I think that creates many difficulties when we want to have constructive, for example, democratic deliberation, or if we want to see a collective problem being solved. So social media have exacerbate this division. They are using particularly emotionally charged content. We have seen, for example, now a lot of people doing videos expressing certain views, have very strong feelings. It has included families, it has included friends, it has included not only political affiliation, it has expanded. So it has become very partisan. It has allowed through this way the more rapid dissemination of misinformation, because of this emotional tendency. We don't really check about the accuracy, even though we know that maybe it's not something wrong. Sometimes with the information, it keeps getting repeated. So they have been created these echo chambers of very specific views, and that has created into this polarization. And I think that it has also increased the distrust to traditional media, because, for example, in social media you can present an actual event, and they can compare it with how a particular channel presented this event. So I think at this point, traditional media cannot bridge this gap. So for this polarization that even sometimes tends to the extremes, there needs to be a consensus for more of the political parties, for more of the candidates, on what are the appropriate limits of criticism, on how do we address our opponents, for example, of having criticism about policies as well. But I'm afraid so far I don't see this coming together, this consensus. And the more that certain parties are competing, that they are very ideologically different, we can see that they are focusing more on energizing their particular bases and emphasizing all these differences that they have, that unfortunately this idea of common ground, of more critical thinking, of more coming together, I think it's not something that we'll see, at least currently.
Right. Your Leverhulme project examines Sino-Russian disinformation synergies during UK and US elections. How would you characterize the evolving strategic division of labor between Moscow and Beijing in influence operations? Do you see evidence of complementary tactics, coordinated narratives, or merely parallel but independent efforts? And how might this coordination shape democratic resilience in the upcoming electoral cycles?
I think that both states, they have really invested on information operation. They have even embedded this element in their national security strategy documents. They have particular units working on this one. And Russia in particularly, it saw very early, starting from 2009, the importance of social media, or how social media will change the particular area of political communication. So they had engaged with social media, and when they started creating the official accounts in 2011 in Twitter, they saw the importance of immediately targeting like the population, providing them with specific information, giving them the views from the Russian officials directly without having a third party, for example, or without, in the case of Russia, as they mentioned, giving other countries framing our policies or what Russia is from our part. So they have invested a lot in their official presence in social media, but also in creating these farms of trolls that we say. We know about this Russia Internet Research Agency, ERA, that it controls many thousands of social media accounts. It creates bots that they use extensively to promote disinformation and to do certain sort of hacking or cyber attacks. So, for example, they have invested a lot both in the technical component but also in the diplomatic component. And also these practices, particularly the technical component, they have been shared with China. China has also created its own mechanisms. So, for example, the China's PLA Strategic Support Force, that it was created in 2015, 2 or 3 years later than the Russian. So they had shared information. Or, for example, that in 2024, they created the Information Support Force, that it places significant emphasis on information related capabilities. So we can see that they have invested in this type of operations. They have common objectives on what they want to achieve. They want to create a disunity and a social disruption in the West, and they want to present themselves in a more positive light. They don't want to show that they are isolated, for example, in the case of Russia, or they want to show that they are very great, even a superpower in the case of China. So they have invested, like I said, more in the technical thing, how they use these bots, how do they do cyber attacks, etc. But they have also made very significant the way they present, the phrase information on social media. So, for instance, both of them, they emphasize in many cases how they were not colonial or imperial powers, and that they are looking more for a multipolar world, that many different countries can have an equal role to the international system, that they are more keen to have multilateral collaboration with many different countries, and they are not limited themselves to an exclusive group, as they have criticized, for instance, the G7 for many years. So they have used, we can say, these converging and coordinated narratives in order to pass these messages. When it comes now to the elections, what they have done is they have tried to amplify through these bots and through these anonymous accounts for both sides. So they are using, let's say, for the right wing, and they are using the certain elements for the left wing. So they really emphasize and they are really keen on exacerbating this already polarization. So they use these accounts in order to disseminate this one, or they create certain posts in order to have more emotional response from the audience. So we can say they play both ways. And I think when it comes to democratic resilience in upcoming electoral circles, this has to do with more educating the public, being and coordinated effort from many different campaigns, political campaigns, to show, for example, that there are the official accounts, to look for official information, where to address on this kind of information. But I think it would be very difficult to monitor the influence of this operation, because even if they this kind of operation, they don't tend to change the views, or for example to turn the support from one candidate to the other. What they particularly have managed to do, especially since 2020, is to create this polarization. So they tend to emphasize we can say, the two edges, and they keep feeding on that. So they keep creating this overly provocative and polarizing operation. So there is this unity in Western societies. There is these different camps being created that they cannot come together, and that creates doubts for what it is the country's foreign policy. So many people don't agree with the country's foreign policy, they don't agree with the domestic foreign policy. They have different views, for example, on what China is doing in the South China Sea. Maybe it's not like the West says. Maybe they are lying to us. Maybe Russia has valid reasons for the war in Ukraine. So this is their goal.
Right. Scholars like Fukuyama and Pildes argue that new technologies have made governance harder by enabling constant mobilization and fragmentation. What regulatory or governance mechanisms do you see as viable for democracies to minimize harm without undermining free speech?
I think this is a deeply double-edged issue, because on the one hand, we want to limit harmful content, or for example, we want to limit disinformation and fake news, for example. But if governments, they adopt a quite aggressive and not well designed intervention, this have the very opposite effect. So it really reinforces this public distrust in democratic institution, in mainstream media. And there are, for example, calls that they're trying to censor us. So for instance, we can see it in many different countries that for example, there is a very famous response here in the UK in social media about the two-tier justice system, that it is trending a lot, it becomes viral, a lot of people use it. So it has really become embedded. So I think in order to create viable governance mechanism, I think we need to stabilize transparency. We need to have a sort of accountability that follows this transparency, and also we really need to use this top down. It shouldn't be, and it's not, it shouldn't be top down, it should be bottom up. So it should be in all the different scales and steps. Because if the government imposes something without listening to the different others forms of governance, local, the people's view, it really is very much perceived negative from the public. I think this idea of community nodes that the social media platforms introduce, it has been very positive because it has managed, even though sometimes it's not that quick to be added, so the message is already spread before the community node has been added, for instance, to provide with the correct information or with a link, or they mention how this information, it has been distorted. So I think that was a positive thing, and that it came from a public engagement and from the social media platforms. And that's why it has been perceived more positively than a direct ban from the government. I think the other very important element is like media literacy and public education. I think this is very important, that instead of resorting to censorship, I think information, whether it is at school, at universities, it needs to have this literacy when it comes to how we understand, how we critically assess information. So it creates societal resilience and training. Also, having more direct coordinated networks, for instance, that can identify this kind of bots. So we need the governments to work with these social media companies in a very open and transparent way to find this kind of actor and minimize access, but not in the sense that we want to silence our political opponents. And that's why regulation should avoid appearing partisan or overreaching, coming from the country, from the political party in power, because they often they are not doing very well in polls and they don't like the narrative that it is created. No, if we need to have regulation, it need to be deliberated from many different political parties, many different organizations, the social media companies itself, and creating frameworks that they won't backfire, they won't create even more distrust in the democratic institutions.
Right. And lastly, Dr. Papageorgiou, looking ahead, how do you anticipate AI-generated disinformation, particularly deepfakes and synthetic text, will transform foreign influence operations by Russia, China, and other major or mid-sized actors such as Iran, Turkey, and Israel in upcoming electoral cycles?
I think it will have a significant impact, and we will see it from now on, because, as I've mentioned, in 2024, we saw that it was used in a particular way from the political campaigns, whether it was to mock the opponents or whether it was to present the one political candidate in a specific way. But I think the more we see advancement in AI, because for now, and there were these kind of images that they were used, that they were evident that they were AI, but the more this technology is advanced and it can produce more realistic images, videos, or they can mimic public figures, and even fabricate, like they can fabricate events. That creates many challenges because it will be more difficult to verify. It can be expanded and it can create, for example, unrest, or it can create, for example, people being, for example, drawn into a particular protest for this one, and they can be located by another group, for instance, without can be easily monitor or verifying the information. So that can spread very easily, and the verification can come later. So it can create many issues. Other countries, particularly Iran, Turkey, North Korea, Israel, they have used also AI tools to target and to create operations that they target both the domestic and international audience. So they have created more sympathetic views when it comes to their movement, and they present it in a specific way. They have tried to discredit their opponents, or they take, for example, a tragedy and the spinning in a particular narratives, for instance. So they have used AI to show, for example, personalization capabilities, and be more tailored to specific demographic audience, whether it is one group or the other group. So fact checking, it will be, even though it will cost more, so it would be an issue that we have to see with the social media, because the information will be, and this generated image and content would be so fast and more advanced that it will create more costs for these companies. So it is a matter of willingness, how far they wanted to go with this one and how much they want to engage in some sort of practices. But I think the more important impact that it will have, except from social media, it will be in the traditional communication. So, for example, during the 2024 campaigns, they were used, for example, telephone calls for voters, or to promote certain kind of, or to discredit certain candidates, for example, for the Senate or the Congress, with these deep fakes, or, for example, using the deep fake images of a particular leader addressing the public. So we will see that it will be widespread. And I think we really need to start thinking, because governments, unfortunately, they tend to follow and quite late the developments. So we really need to see and engage with the social media companies on what would be the challenges and what are the best ways to address these issues.
Dr. Maria Papageorgiou, thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much as well.